Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're venturing into the world of interpretivism in sociology.
Mm.
Now, if that sounds a bit, purely academic, maybe think again. We want to explore why this perspective is actually really crucial for understanding human behavior, especially for those of you studying sociology.
Exactly. Yeah, think about it this way. You've got other approaches, like positivism, which often tries to study society almost like a natural science, looking for big patterns, measuring
With the
things.
quantitative stuff.
Yeah, but interpretivism takes a different tack. It says, look, humans aren't just pushed around by forces. Our actions come from the meanings we create, individually, together.
So the goal is getting inside people's heads almost, seeing their viewpoint.
That's a good way to put it. Understanding those meanings, grasping those different perspectives within society. That's the aim.
And the tools for this are mainly qualitative methods, right? Not huge data sets.
Precisely. We're talking about methods that gather really rich, detailed information. Things that try to capture the depth of actual human experience.
Okay, so let's maybe start with one of those methods, unstructured interviews.
Yes, unstructured interviews. And what's really interesting here is how different they feel from, say, a survey you might fill out.
How so?
Well, picture more of a conversation,
Yeah.
a relaxed chat. The interviewer has general topics in mind, sure, but not like a strict list of questions they have to ask in order.
Ah, so it flows more naturally.
Exactly. It follows the lead of the person being interviewed. The researcher asks follow-up questions, digs deeper into what they're saying, their feelings, their thoughts. It's really about seeing the world from their perspective.
In their own words.
In their own words. That's key.
Okay, let's unpack that a bit. Why is that so valuable? What are the advantages?
Well, a big one is rapport, building trust. For sociology students, understanding how rapport works is really important. This method is great for that.
Because people open up more.
Yeah, when people feel comfortable listened to, they're often much more willing to share honest, detailed stuff about their lives, their experiences. And that leads to what sociologists call high validity,
Meaning it's likely a true picture.
a truer reflection of their reality, yes. Plus, it's incredibly flexible. You might be talking about one thing, and the participant brings up something totally unexpected, but really relevant.
Ah, so you can follow those interesting tangents.
Exactly. You can explore that new avenue, uncover insights you might never have even thought to ask about with a rigid set of questions. This is super useful if you're studying groups whose perspectives aren't often heard. You know,
That makes a lot of sense. You're getting real nuance. But it can't be all advantages. What are the challenges with this approach? It sounds quite involved.
oh, it definitely is. As you can probably guess, these interviews take a lot of time
To conduct them.
to conduct them, yeah, but also to analyze all that rich qualitative data you get. It's not just ticking boxes.
Right, you've got pages of transcripts.
Exactly. So that naturally limits how many people you can realistically include in your study. You often end up with smaller sample sizes,
Okay.
and it also takes real skill to do these interviews well. You need to know how to guide the conversation without leading the person, how to ask those insightful follow-up questions. So interviewer training is important, and that can add to the cost.
So for students thinking about research design, you get depth, but maybe not breadth.
That's a very good way to sum it up. With smaller samples, ones that usually aren't randomly selected, it's much harder to say, okay, these findings definitely apply to everyone. Generalizing is tricky.
And reliability, can you repeat the study easily?
That's another issue. Because each interview is unique, shaped by that specific interaction between the interviewer and the participant, it's really difficult to replicate precisely.
So another researcher might have a slightly different conversation.
They almost certainly would, and they might emphasize different things, potentially leading to somewhat different conclusions. So yeah, reliability can be lower compared to more standardized methods.
Okay, that's clear. Let's shift gear then. Another classic method, especially for interpretivists, participant observation. I think most sociology students encounter this one.
Oh, absolutely. It's a cornerstone. Participant observation is basically where the researcher immerses themselves in the group they want to study.
They join in.
They join in. They become, in a sense, a participant in the daily lives, the routines, the activities of that group. And this can be done openly.
Overtly, where people know they're being
Yes, overtly, or it can be done covertly.
undercover.
Right, where the group doesn't know the researcher's true identity or purpose.
Wow. Okay. Going covert sounds like you could get some really unfiltered stuff. What are the big plus points of observation generally?
Well, the potential for high validity is huge again. You're seeing behavior as it actually happens in its natural setting.
Not in a lab or an interview room.
Exactly, not in an artificial situation. So you can capture all this rich contextual detail. The unspoken rules, the body language, the way people interact, the stuff people just take for granted and might never mention in an interview.
The everyday life detail.
Precisely. And for a sociology student, understanding those subtle dynamics, that's often where the real insight into a group's meaning-making lies.
You're seeing a why in action, maybe? But again, what are the hurdles, the things researchers and students need to watch out for?
Well, reliability is definitely a challenge, just like with unstructured interviews, maybe even more so.
Because it's less structured?
Yes, it often relies heavily on the researcher's own observations. Their interpretations of what's going on is hard to systematize completely. So replicating it is very difficult. Another researcher watching the same group might focus on different things, interpret interactions differently. And again, these studies usually involve small groups, so generalizing the findings beyond that specific group is problematic. You can't really say, this is how all groups like this behave.
And what about the researcher themselves? Can their presence affect things?
Absolutely. There are a couple of key issues there. One is the researcher potentially getting too involved, losing their objectivity.
Ah, that idea of going native.
Exactly, that's the term. The researcher might become so immersed, so sympathetic to the group's perspective, that they find it hard to step back and analyze things critically.
Right.
But even if they stay objective, and even if it's overt observation where people know they're being watched,
People might act differently.
they might. That's the Hawthorne effect. The simple fact of being observed can change people's behavior.
Okay, and with covert research, there must be ethical issues.
Huge ethical issues. I mean, you're deceiving people. There's no informed consent.
Sure.
Issues around privacy, anonymity, potential harm if their identities or activities are revealed. It's ethically complex territory.
Definitely something students need to think hard about.
Absolutely. And there are practical barriers too, just getting access to a group, gaining trust, staying involved over time.
Yeah.
It can be really demanding.
Okay, let's move to another source interpretivists use: documents. Especially things like historical documents. For students, knowing how to work with existing materials is a key skill, isn't it?
It really is. And interpretivists use a whole range of documents. You've got personal ones, think diaries, letters, maybe old photographs, autobiographies.
Things that give individual perspectives.
Exactly. Really intimate glimpses into individual lives, experiences, the meanings people attach to things. But they also use public or historical documents. Things like newspapers, school records, government reports.
What do those offer?
They give valuable context, insights into broader social trends, how institutions work, how policies play out. Personal documents might show you individual feelings, beliefs, values very directly. Public documents help you understand the bigger picture, the social structures, and how they change.
So if you were studying, say, family life over time, old letters could be gold dust.
Absolutely. Historical comparison becomes really possible. You can track how ideas about family or work or gender roles or identity have shifted across generations by looking at documents from different eras.
And you mentioned policies.
Yeah, looking at documents related to, say, education reforms or changes in marriage laws can give you rich insights into what those policies were meant to do and maybe what actually happened, their unintended consequences.
It sounds like a great way to study social change without having to interview people from the past.
Yeah.
But how do you know if the documents are, well, real or telling the whole story?
Yes. Critical evaluation is essential. Authenticity is the first hurdle. Is this document actually what it claims to be? Is it from the time period it says it's from?
Forgery or misattribution?
It's possible, especially with older materials or things with high stakes. Then there's validity. Even if it's authentic, is it accurate? Is it presenting a complete picture? Well, a personal diary is obviously subjective. It's one person's view, maybe written with a particular audience in mind, even if just themselves. Official records might be selective, edited, maybe presenting the official story rather than the messy reality.
So you need to be critical.
Very critical. You need to ask, who produced this document? Why? For whom? What might be left out?
And just like deciding who to interview or observe, is there a bias in terms of which documents even survive for us to find?
Oh, definitely. Think about it historically. Who was literate? Who had the time and resources to keep diaries or extensive letters.
Right. Probably not everyone equally.
Exactly. So the documents we have might overrepresent the experiences of certain groups, the wealthy, the educated, men perhaps more than women in some periods. Official records might focus more on certain populations or types of events. It's called survival bias.
So again, for students using documents, be aware of whose voices might be missing.
Crucial. You have to be mindful of those potential gaps and biases when you're interpreting what the documents tell you.
This really does highlight how interpretivism offers such a different but, equally vital way of looking at society compared to something like positivism. I know we have that comparison table in our notes.
Yeah, and that table really lays out the core differences. I think for sociology students, the key thing to grasp is how their fundamental starting points differ.
Okay.
Interpretivism, as we've been saying, it's all about understanding those subjective meanings behind our actions. So it uses qualitative methods, interviews, observation, document analysis to get depth and context.
While positivism.
Positivism is more focused on finding objective patterns, maybe cause and effect relationships and social behavior. It tends to lean on quantitative data, statistics, surveys.
So it's like understanding the why through depth versus identifying the what and how many through breadth. Is that fair?
That's pretty good shorthand, yeah. Interpretivists generally see humans as active agents, constantly interpreting and creating their social world. Positivists tend to view human behavior as more shaped by external structures, forces that you can measure objectively.
And that leads to different priorities in research.
Directly. Interpretivists often prioritize achieving high validity, getting that deep, accurate understanding of the specific meanings they're studying. They might be less worried if the findings aren't perfectly generalizable or easy to replicate exactly.
Whereas positivists want reliability and generalizability.
Typically, yes.
Yeah.
They aim for findings that are consistent, repeatable, and can ideally be applied to wider populations. It's about looking for those broader social laws or patterns.
It really is like having two different toolkits, isn't it, for looking at the same complex thing, society.
Exactly. Neither is necessarily better overall. They just ask different questions and are suited to different kinds of research problems.
Okay, so let's try and pull this together. As a final overview for everyone listening, especially the sociology students, what are the headlines, strengths, and weaknesses of these interpretivist methods we've discussed?
Well, the core strength, undoubtedly, is the richness and depth of understanding they provide. Getting at the subjective meanings, the why behind behavior.
Seeing the world through others' eyes.
Precisely. They offer flexibility, you can explore unexpected things, and they're often really good for sensitive topics where you need people's personal stories to truly understand an issue.
And the weaknesses. We've touched on them.
Yeah, the main challenges usually relate to representativeness. Those small, often non-random samples make it hard to generalize. Reliability can be low because the methods are less standardized and harder to replicate exactly.
And the researcher's role.
The researcher's own perspective can introduce bias. That's always a concern. And practically, these methods can be very time-consuming and expensive compared to, say, sending out a mass survey. And the ethical dimensions, especially with covert observation, need careful thought.
Okay. And for those sociology students maybe facing exams or planning projects, any key piece of advice regarding these methods?
I'd say the most important thing is always link the method back to the core concepts. Don't just describe unstructured interviews or participant observation. Analyze them.
In
terms of validity, reliability, representativeness, ethics. What are the strengths and weaknesses of this specific method when it comes to these specific issues? That's where the marks are, usually.
Good tip.
And also, be ready to compare and contrast. Show you understand how interpretivist approaches differ from positivist ones, their different goals, assumptions, strengths, weaknesses, and if you can, bring in examples. Mentioning actual sociological studies that use these methods well really demonstrates your understanding. Think Paul Willis's Learning to Labor for Observation and Interviews, for example.
Excellent advice. Okay, so to quickly wrap up our deep dive today, interpretivism gives us this incredibly valuable lens for understanding the why of human action. It uses qualitative methods, those unstructured interviews, participant observation, document analysis to get rich, deep insights.
But it comes with trade-offs. Strengths and validity and depth, but often challenges with representativeness, reliability, and potential researcher influence.
Exactly. So maybe a final thought for you, particularly if you're a sociology student listening, as you navigate your studies and maybe even your own research. When do you think these interpretivist approaches offer the most powerful insights into our social world? And just as importantly, what are the potential blind spots or limitations you need to keep in mind?
Yeah. Thinking critically about the right tool for the right question and understanding the limits of those tools, that's really at the heart of doing good sociology.